Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about this year's Roadhouse remake starring the extremely buff Jake Gyllenhaal. And Gyllenhaal plays Elwood Dalton, a once successful mixed martial arts fighter whose career and life in general imploded spectacularly after he killed one of his opponents in the ring. Uh, Eaten up with self loathing, Dalton now lives out of his car while scrounging up money from dubiously legal fight clubs, where he often wins by forfeit because who wants to fight the guy who legitimately killed somebody? Now, Dalton's guilt ridden journey to self destruction has almost reached its inevitably grisly end when he gets a lifeline, a job offer, to work as head bouncer of an unruly roadhouse in the Florida Keys. Said offer comes from Frankie, the owner of said roadhouse in the community of Glass Key. Now, Frankie's place has always been wild, but lately there's been a particularly bad crowd coming in. And if she wants to reinstate order, Frankie needs someone a whole lot more skilled than the average bouncer to take charge of security. And so Dalton finds himself in the Florida Keys, dealing not just with the thugs who want to trash the bar, which he frankly handles pretty easily, but also the far more perplexing experience of finding himself welcomed into the local community. It's been a long time since anyone was pleased to see him, and it's clear that Dalton isn't sure how to handle that. Of course, this wouldn't be a very long film if that was all there was to the story, so there's no surprise to hear that the bar bashing goons weren't just random thugs. They were sent to the roadhouse with a specific purpose. The man behind them isn't going to give up easily, and that means the situation is only going to escalate from here. Now, this movie had quite the long production journey. MGM first began development of a Roadhouse remake all the way back in 2013. By 2015, the original director and writer were off the job, but a star had been chosen, MMA fighter Ronda Rousey. Now, of course, at the end of 2015, we had the abrupt and unexpected demise of Rousey's famous domination of women's MMA. I don't know if her too emphatic and high profile defeats derailed the plans that were in place for this movie at that time, but I did know that it didn't get much traction again until 2021 when MGM finally landed their star, Gyllenhaal, and their director, Doug Lynam. Now, in 2022, by which time MGM had been bought by Amazon Studios, the movie finally got the green light. But even after the film was shot and ready for release, things still didn't go all that smoothly. Amazon decided to skip a theatrical release and go straight to streaming. This angered the director, who initially threatened to boycott the film's premiere in response. So, all in all, quite a bumpy ride for this movie to finally see the light of day. So, was all the trouble worth it? Well, critics had decidedly mixed views about that. For my part, I did enjoy the film, though I admit that it has a few issues. So let's unpack the good and the bad, shall we? And let's start with the film's centerpiece, its high octane, high impact fight scenes. These are many and varied, and I think on the whole, the film does a pretty good job of balancing the competing need to keep both the scale of things escalating over time and also to ease off from time to time so that the audience has a moment to breathe. The fight choreography is solid throughout, and the movie does a good job of conveying the weight of each blow. I chose the term high impact quite deliberately earlier because this is a film where the fights do feel genuinely impactful. Now, not real, I've got to emphasize that, not real. The action is much too fluid, too obviously scripted for it to be real. And of course, the physical punishment that Dalton both suffers and inflicts are well beyond the realms of plausibility. So, not real, but impactful. Now, adding to the pace and impact of the action scenes is the cinematography, which is generally very fast paced and dynamic. Rapid cuts, sharp camera movements, bursts of first person perspective, all these techniques and more are used. Generally, I liked them and thought they worked quite well, but this is not a universal reaction. Some critics have specifically complained about this element of the movie, so people's mileage may vary. But on the whole, I thought the action scenes were very much a strength of this film, which is a good thing because they are very much its centerpiece. Now, one area in which I did think the film stumbled was in its use, or rather, failure to properly use its supporting cast. It introduces a lot of potentially interesting characters. Frankie the bar owner, Laura the bartender, Charlie the bookshop operator, a couple of likable bouncer characters, plus a host of bad guys. But then it proceeds to generally give each of them only a handful of two brief scenes. Even the designated love interest, a doctor named Ellie, gets short shrift. After she first meets Dalton at the hospital, she gets only three more brief scenes with him before the film moves to, oh, and now the bad guys have kidnapped her. My suspicion is that some of these roles may have initially been intended to be bigger, but then scaled back to allow more time for the secondary antagonist, Nox. Played by real life MMA fighter Conor McGregor, Nox is a flamboyant, over the top human peacock of a character who struts around like he thinks the film is about him. And to a certain point, I think there's some value in his perception of that. The movie does give more attention and screen time to him than I think it probably should, given how many other villainous characters it is trying to juggle. It's like they got very excited about having Conor McGregor and they amped up the role. Now, Knox's flamboyant, cheerful amorality does also jar somewhat against the film's overall darker take on the basic Roadhouse formula. Now, unpacking that is going to take brushing up against some spoilery concepts. So if you're worried about hearing too much, probably turn off the video now or jump to the last 5 seconds to see what I'm talking about next time. If you're still here, I think it's worth noting that this version of Roadhouse takes a much more somber approach to its central character than did the original. Patrick Swayze's Dalton was a warrior philosopher tortured by one loss of self control in his past, or so the movie told us anyway. He didn't do an especially deep job of conveying a real sense of torment, probably because that would be at odds with the cheesy action film aesthetic of the rest of the movie. And ultimately, this whole plotline functioned mostly as yet another villain or obstacle for Dalton to overcome. Elwood Dalton actually feels like a man with a real sense of self loathing, not like the original. And there's not the same sense that his problem is merely another thing for him to overcome, and that doing so is as simple as making the right choice once. Oh, he chose not to cross the line this time, therefore he is all better and will never cross the line again. The modern Dalton genuinely feels tortured by what he did, and much of the film is built on that fact. His self loathing is also not something that he can easily rise beyond. There's no simple moment of catharsis here where he does the right thing and all is now well. Don't expect everything to wrap up as neatly here as it did in 1989. Now, I liked that this was a more grown up engagement with what Dalton had done and was doing. And for the studio, of course, I think the lack of a completely tighter resolution is probably good from the it's much easier to make a sequel this way lens as well. Because, in the first film, Dalton's life was kind of neatly wrapped up in a bow, and what other stories are you going to tell? This Dalton, you can easily tell more stories about because he's still on a journey. But I also think that fact made for a more grounded, bittersweet conclusion, and one that I rather liked. So, on the whole, I liked this movie. I think it was good. If you have Amazon Prime, it's worth checking out. It's free to stream after all. So, give it a look. And next time, an even more recent Amazon release, the Fallout TV show, which just dropped last week. I spent the whole weekend binging it, and now you get to hear what I thought.